The radio went dead at 13:47. Not static, not interference, just silence, the kind that falls like a curtain and tells everyone listening that something catastrophic has happened on the other side of it. On the ridge overlooking FOB Kestrel, Master Chief Darnell Graves pressed his earpiece in twice. Nothing. He scanned the valley below, where his three-man advance team had been moving through the tree line toward a confirmed insurgent cache site. They'd been 200 meters from the target. They were on time, on course, and completely exposed. Then came the crack. One shot. Single round. Suppressed, but not completely. It echoed off the ridgeline like a hand clap in a cathedral, and the lead insurgent spotter, who'd been tracking Graves' team, through a spotting scope, dropped before his finger reached the radio. Clean. Instant. Gone. Nobody in the valley fired that shot. Nobody on the ridge fired that shot. Nobody on the comms net called it in. Graves stood still for exactly 4 seconds, which for a man who'd spent 22 years in special operations was practically an eternity. His eyes moved to the tall grass on the opposite ridge, 840 meters away. Too far for most. Impossible angle. Bad wind off the mountains. Morning thermals still rising. He scanned it twice and saw nothing. Then he noticed the grass didn't move the same way twice. One blade, maybe 8 inches above the rest, had stopped swaying. Just stopped. Like something had decided to be invisible, and almost succeeded. Master Chief Graves had been in Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Yemen, and 4 other places that would never appear on any map. He'd worked alongside snipers who could thread a needle at 1,000 meters. He'd seen the best in the world do impossible things in impossible conditions. He'd never seen a shot like that. He keyed his radio. Overwatch. This is Kestrel Actual. Who fired? The frequency held its breath. Then a voice came back. Low. Unhurried. Steady as the ground itself. Threat neutralized, Master Chief. Recommend your team advance before secondary element repositions. You have approximately 90 seconds. Not a call sign. Not a rank. Just information delivered with the kind of calm that only came from somewhere very far past fear. Graves didn't move for 1 full second. Then he made a decision. He trusted it. Before we show you who was behind that rifle, what she saw that nobody else could see, and the line she delivered that left a room full of special operators completely silent, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on. Because this story isn't about the shot. It's about the woman nobody thought could make it. FOB Kestrel sat on the edge of a province that had been changing hands for 3 years. It wasn't strategic in the traditional sense. No oil, no pipeline, no population center worth controlling. What it had was terrain. Brutal, unpredictable, layered terrain that channeled movement, swallowed communication signals, and gave every advantage to whoever understood it first. The Americans at Kestrel understood it second. They'd been learning the hard way. Petty Officer First Class Zara Okafor arrived on a supply bird at 0615 on a Tuesday. No ceremony, no escort. She stepped off the ramp with a long rifle case strapped across her back, a duffel over one shoulder, and a weather-beaten logbook tucked under her arm. She was 5 feet 7 inches. Lean, not in the gym way, but in the field way, where every ounce that isn't functional has been burned off by necessity. Her uniform was regulation, clean, but lived in. No visible patches except for her name tag and the insignia of a Naval Special Warfare Support Activity Unit that most people at Kestrel had never heard of. The airfield coordinator, Specialist Walsh, glanced up from his clipboard. Name? Okafor. He scanned the sheet. Found her name near the bottom, listed under the category that never drew attention. Augmentation personnel. Temporary assignment. No specialization listed. You're in the auxiliary billets. East side. Ask for Sergeant Pruitt. He'll get you squared away. She nodded and walked without asking for directions. Walsh watched her go, then turned to the corpsman beside him. Who authorized that? The corpsman shrugged. Someone above my pay grade. That was the thing about Zara Okafor. She had a way of arriving in places that made people look at their paperwork twice, but the paperwork always checked out. The clearance was always valid. The authorization was always signed. It just never said much about who she was or why she was actually there. At Firebase Kestrel, she was technically assigned to the intelligence support section. Data synthesis, they called it. Pattern analysis. She was supposed to sit in a room with screens and pull threads from surveillance feeds and signals data. That part was true. She did do that. In fact, she did it better than the two analysts who'd been there for 4 months combined. By her third day, she'd identified a pattern in insurgent movement that every previous report had missed. Not because the data wasn't there, because nobody had been looking at the wind. But that's a detail for later. Master Chief Graves noticed her on day 2. Not because she said anything, because she didn't. He ran his morning brief at 0700 in the Tactical Operations Center. 12 people in the room. Officers, NCOs, contractors with laminated badges and expensive watches. Everyone had something to say. Questions, objections, clarifications, all the noise that accumulated when people wanted to appear essential. Okafor sat in the back row. Didn't ask a question. Didn't offer an opinion. She had the logbook open and she was writing, but Graves could tell by the angle of her pen that she wasn't transcribing. She was responding, working something out for herself. After the brief, when everyone else was filing out and trading complaints about the coffee, she stayed behind. Walked to the map board. Stood in front of it for 3 minutes exactly, tracing a route with her eyes that Graves had specifically avoided in the brief because it led through terrain his team couldn't adequately cover. Then she left without a word. He almost said something, but he'd been doing this long enough to know when someone was thinking versus when someone was performing. She was thinking hard. He let it go. That was day 2. By day 5, the rumors had already started. The SEAL element at Kestrel was small. 6 operators, 2 support personnel, 1 comm specialist, and Graves, who ran everything with a kind of efficient authority that didn't require volume. They were there for a specific mission set. High-value target interdiction, disruption of a supply network that had been funding operations across 3 provinces. Quiet work. Surgical. They didn't need augmentation. They didn't ask for it. And when word circulated that the new intelligence analyst had been pulling security camera feeds from the village market and cross-referencing them with atmospheric pressure data to predict which roads would be used based on vehicle weight capacity and dust accumulation patterns, the initial reaction from most of the team was somewhere between mild amusement and polite skepticism. Senior Chief Rourke was less polite about it. "She's an analyst," he said one evening in the operations tent, not bothering to lower his voice. "Glorified satellite tech. I don't need a weather report. I need a firing solution." One of the younger petty officers, Torres, glanced toward the door. "You sure she can't hear you?" "I don't care if she can." Rourke leaned back, arms crossed. "We've had 3 different support elements rotate through here in as many months. They analyze, they report, they rotate out. None of them have spent a day behind a rifle. None of them have called a shot under pressure. None of them belong in the field, and she won't be any different." He wasn't entirely wrong about the others. He was completely wrong about her. What Rourke didn't know, what most people at Kestrel didn't know, was that the Naval Special Warfare Support activity didn't send analysts who only did analysis. It sent people who could do the analysis and then act on it, alone, in conditions where acting on it meant the difference between the mission succeeding and the team not coming home. Zara Okafor had qualified as a sniper at 24. She'd been the second black woman to complete the Special Operations Target Interdiction course and the only one in her cohort to earn a distinguished rating. She'd spent 4 years embedded with units that operated in places so remote that the nearest resupply was measured in days, not hours. She had 31 confirmed long-range engagements across 2 theaters. She had a precision record that made seasoned snipers read it twice, then read again. None of that was in her file at Kestrel. Not the version anyone could access. She'd asked for it that way. Not out of modesty. Out of practicality. She'd learned early that when people knew what she could do before they'd seen her do it, they spent their energy arguing about whether it was possible instead of using the information she was giving them. The skepticism didn't bother her. She'd been navigating it since she was 19 years old and walked into a recruiter's office and said she wanted special operations. It had been her fuel ever since. On the evening of day 6, she went to Graves. Not to brief. Not to request. She walked into the operations center at 1900, waited until he finished reviewing the next day's route plan, and set her logbook on the table in front of him. He looked at it, then at her. "Your team crosses this grid," she said, pointing to a section of the map she'd marked with 3 parallel lines, "at any point between 1100 to 1500 tomorrow, and you'll have a spotter problem." He studied the map. "We've run that approach twice. No contact." The contact point moved. 3 days ago, they shifted their observation post from the southern ridge to the notch at grid 443. The southern ridge gave them line of sight on the approach road. The notch gives them line of sight on the approach road and the rally point. She turned the logbook toward him. Inside, a grid of handwritten calculations. Wind readings, elevation angles, shadow angles at different times of day. "I've been tracking their rotation schedule. They use the same 3 spotters on a 4-day cycle. Tomorrow is the rotation day. The new man is better. He uses a thermal scope, and he's faster to communicate than the others." Graves said nothing for a long moment. "How do you know about the thermal scope?" "Market surveillance footage. Day before yesterday. He was at the same stall where the other 2 bought food. He carried the case differently. Longer. Heavier on one end. Different strap or pattern." Another silence. "Why didn't this go through the intelligence summary?" "I submitted it. It was listed as low confidence assessment pending additional confirmation." She said it without bitterness, just fact. "I'm giving you the additional confirmation now." Graves looked at the calculations again. Long-range wind data, temperature gradients, predicted thermal updraft timing. This wasn't analyst work. This was preparation for something entirely different. He looked up. "What are you actually asking me?" She met his eyes. "Let me overwatch the advance element." The room felt smaller. Graves leaned back. He studied her the way he studied terrain, not quickly, not superficially, but with the kind of attention that was looking for what wasn't obvious. She didn't fill the silence with justification. Didn't press. Just waited. "What's your maximum effective range?" he asked. "Confirmed?" 1,100 meters. "In these conditions?" "In worse." He was quiet for 4 seconds, which in that room, at that moment, felt like an hour. "Report to the armor mat 0500, he said. "I'll have credentials pulled." She picked up her logbook, tucked it under her arm, and left without another word. The morning was cold the way Afghan mornings always were, cold that came from altitude rather than season, the kind that cut through gear that was designed for worse, and still found a way to remind you it was there. Zara was already in position by 0545. She'd moved to the opposite ridgeline before dawn, navigating a route she'd mapped from the surveillance data. No guide, no backup, just a rucksack, her rifle, and a logbook. The route took her through a creek bed that was dry but slippery with frost, up a slope of loose shale that required 3-point contact for every step, and onto a spur of rock that jutted over the valley like a broken tooth. From that position, she had a clear sight line to the notch at grid 443. 840 meters. She set up with the methodical patience of someone who understood that the setup was 90% of the shot. No rush, no tension, every adjustment made deliberately. The bipod leveled, the scope dial for the altitude and temperature she'd calculated the night before. The windage corrected for the morning thermal she predicted would be running northeast at approximately 7 knots by 0600. She'd been tracking that thermal for 3 days. Then she waited. Good snipers could wait. Elite snipers made waiting into a craft of its own. They controlled their breath and their thoughts and their heartbeat and the temperature of their own hands, and they turned stillness into a weapon before they ever touched the trigger. Zara had been waiting in one form or another since she was a girl, waiting for someone to see past the surface, waiting for the door to open that people kept insisting was closed, waiting for the moment when the argument would end because the evidence would be undeniable. She'd gotten very good at it. At 0712, movement in the notch. She saw it before it was visible. The shadow pattern changed, not the shadow itself, but the way the light around it shifted, the way a human presence displaced the stillness in a way that wind and rock didn't. She was looking for it because she predicted it. And there it was, the spotter. settling into his position, moving with trained economy. She could see the case. Long heavier on one end. She watched him set up and never touch the trigger. Her job right now was to watch, to confirm the threat assessment, to hold. Below her, Graves' advance element entered the tree line at 0740. 3 operators moving in practice silence. They were good. She'd watched them work before, and they were very good. Clean spacing, disciplined, no unnecessary movement. The spotter found them at 0743. She saw him move, saw the case open, saw the scope come up. She also saw the secondary. The second man she hadn't accounted for, tucked into a crack in the rock wall 8 feet to the spotter's right, barely visible, but visible to someone who'd spent 3 days learning exactly what this ridge looked like and exactly what didn't belong on it. He had a radio. She had to make a choice in the next 4 seconds. Take the spotter, the immediate threat to the team's approach, or take the radio man. Prevent him from calling in their position before she could take the spotter. Most people would take the immediate threat. It was the trained response, the obvious response. She took the radio man first. 1 shot, suppressed, 840 meters into a notch that gave her a window roughly the size of a dinner plate. Then she cycled, reacquired, and took the spotter before he understood what had happened to the man beside him. 2 rounds, 2 targets, 11 seconds apart, counting the recycle. Neither fell into a position visible from the valley floor. Neither triggered a sound that carried beyond the ridgeline. The team advanced through a threat they never knew existed. Then she keyed her radio and told Graves that his 90 seconds had started. The debrief was supposed to be routine. It wasn't. Graves had radioed the moment his team reached the cache site, confirmed the intelligence, recovered materials that would disrupt the supply network for months. By the time they extracted and returned to Kestrel, the base had already logged the operation as a successful interdiction. Clean, efficient, no casualties. What the base hadn't logged was the question nobody could answer. Who fired those shots? Senior Chief Rourke had gone to the armory first, pulled the records, found only 1 authorized weapon checked out that morning for the Overwatch position, listed under Okafor, Z. He'd looked at the confirmation sheet for a long time. The caliber, the range estimate that had already been sketched into the incident log by the team's ground element. Then he'd walked very quietly to the operations center and sat down. At 16:30, Graves called a full debrief. The whole element, plus the support staff. Rourke sat near the back. He hadn't said much since he got back from the armory. The debrief ran through the mission sequence. Entry, approach, cache identification, extraction. Everything clean. Graves walked through it without dramatizing. That was his way. Then he got to the Overwatch element. He looked at Okafor, who was seated where she always sat. Back row. Logbook open. Expression steady. Walk us through what you saw, he said. She did. Clear, organized, chronological. Primary spotter. Secondary radio element. Decision sequence. Shot 1. Shot 2. Timing. Wind correction. She spoke in the language of her craft, precise and without excess. The room was quiet. Not the quiet of disinterest. The quiet of recalibration. Torres, the young petty officer, leaned toward the man next to him and whispered, "Did she say 840 meters?" The man didn't answer. He was still doing the math. Rourke sat with his arms uncrossed, which for him was an unusual position. He was looking at his hands. When she finished, Graves nodded once. Then he looked around the room. Questions for Petty Officer Okafor? One of the other operators, Petty Officer Reyes, raised his hand. Not to challenge. The tone was different. The secondary element. How did you see him? We reviewed the surveillance imagery after the op. He's not visible in any of our prior footage. He wasn't visible in the camera footage, she said. He was visible in the shadow data. The thermal imaging from the drone pass at 0415 showed residual heat signature in the rock crack that didn't correspond to the ambient temperature decay curve for stone at that altitude. Someone had been lying in that position for at least 2 hours before the drone passed. Silence again. You pulled the thermal data, Reyes said slowly, and you ran a decay curve calculation. The night before. Another pause. Longer. Graves looked at Rourke. Rourke was still looking at his hands. Then Rourke looked up. His jaw was set, not with anger, with something harder to name, something that only happened to men who'd spent their whole careers being the most capable person in the room and had just discovered they might not be. "How long have you been shooting?" he asked her. Zara didn't hesitate. 14 years. Rourke nodded slowly. That was all he said, but something had shifted in the room and everyone felt it. Graves picked up a pen, clicked it once, sat down, looked at her again. "You identified the pattern shift 3 days ago. You submitted it through the intelligence chain and it was flagged as low confidence." "Yes. If it hadn't been flagged, your team would have known about the secondary element before departure. The approach route would have been adjusted. The overwatch position might not have been necessary." The words landed without blame, but they landed. Graves turned to the intelligence section chief, a captain named Waldron, who was seated to his left and had said nothing during the entire debrief. "Is that accurate?" Graves asked. The assessment was in the system and flagged low confidence. Waldron straightened. "We receive a high volume of pattern analysis submissions. Without additional. Is it accurate?" A pause. "Yes." Graves looked at him for 3 more seconds. Then he turned back to the room. "When a member of this element submits an assessment, it gets reviewed within 6 hours. That's not a request." Waldron nodded without speaking. Graves looked at Okafor one more time. She hadn't changed her expression through any of it. Hadn't leaned forward when he addressed Waldron. Hadn't adjusted her posture when the room's energy shifted in her direction. She sat the same way she always sat. Like the attention didn't matter. Like she'd come here for a reason that had nothing to do with being noticed. "Good work today," Graves said. It was 4 words. At Kestrel, delivered by Graves, it was the equivalent of standing ovation. She nodded once, closed her logbook, and that was that. Word moved through Firebase Kestrel the way it always did. Not through official channels. Through the mess hall, through the equipment cleaning area, through the quiet conversations that happened after the day's operations had wound down and people finally allowed themselves to be human again. Torres told the story first because Torres was 26 and still at the age where extraordinary things demanded to be shared. He told it to his bunkmate, who told it to the comm specialist, who told it to both support personnel before lights out. By the next morning, every person on the base had heard some version of it. Some versions were accurate. 2 shots, 2 targets, 840 meters, adverse conditions, 1 round each. No misses. Some versions added details that hadn't happened, because stories collected decoration the way walls collected dust. But the core of it stayed true, because the core of it was specific enough that you couldn't dilute it without losing the point entirely. Rourke found her at the perimeter wall at 0630. She was standing facing the valley with a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold and the logbook that was always nearby. He stood next to her without being invited, which was his way, and was quiet for a moment. 14 years, he said. Not a question this time. Yes. Where did you start? She looked at him sideways. Not suspicious, just measuring whether the question was genuine. Quantico, then the pipeline. He nodded. Process that. I made assumptions about you. I know. He turned toward the valley. The morning light was doing something to the distant peaks, turning them amber at the edges. The secondary element. If you hadn't taken him first, he had a radio and a sight line to a relay point. From the moment he transmitted to the moment your team was engaged, best case was 4 minutes. The approach had 3 minutes remaining before your lead element would have been at the tree line. It would have been tight. He absorbed this. So, you took the radio man first because the spotter was stationary and the window on the radio man was closing. Yes, and you knew you'd have time to cycle and reacquire the spotter. I'd practiced the sequence against a similar target geometry 3 times the night before on the simulator. He turned and looked at her fully for the first time in a conversation that wasn't condescending or skeptical. Just looked, the way Graves had looked at the terrain, trying to see what was actually there. Why didn't you say any of this when you got here? She held the coffee cup with both hands, not because it was cold, but out of habit. Because if I'd walked in and told you what I could do, you would have spent your energy deciding whether to believe me instead of listening to the information I was giving you. She paused. I've been doing this long enough to know that the information is more useful if people receive it before they've decided how to frame the messenger. Rourke was quiet for a long moment. That's a lot of patience, he finally said. It is. She looked back at the valley. But patience is just another form of preparation. You wait for the right moment. Then you make the shot. He nodded, said nothing else, picked up his own coffee from the ledge beside him and drank. They stood at the perimeter wall together while the sun finished clearing the peaks and the base came alive around them. Neither of them needed to say more than that. 3 days later, a mission came in, not the kind that came through the normal channel. This one came in at 0200 on a Monday, flagged priority, time-sensitive, with a targeting package attached that had been built from intelligence gathered partly from Okafor's pattern analysis. A high-value facilitator, moving through a sector that had been quiet for 2 weeks, which Okafor had predicted in writing 4 days earlier, based on the same atmospheric and movement pattern analysis that had identified the notch at grid 443. The target window was narrow. 6 hours. Maximum. Graves convened his element at 0230. He ran through the package. The route, the target description, the timeline, the rules of engagement. Clean, efficient, decisive. That was how he always briefed. Then he got to Overwatch. He looked at Okafor. I'd like you on the primary Overwatch position. Estimated range to the engagement corridor, 1,060 meters. Thermal conditions similar to day of last operation. Wind projections are yours. She'd already done the wind projections. She'd been calculating them since the previous morning, when the pattern had indicated this sector would activate within 72 hours. She had the numbers ready. Doable, she said. Rourke, sitting to Graves' left, nodded once. No objection, no skepticism. Torres across the table looked briefly at the targeting package, then at Okafor, then back at the package. He said very quietly, to no one in particular, she already knew. She had. The operation ran at first light. The advance element moved through a route adjusted to incorporate her updated assessment of the observation post-rotation schedule. The Overwatch position she'd selected was the highest point on a western spur that required a 40-minute approach in darkness, but gave her 1,100 meters of unobstructed line of sight across the entire engagement corridor. She was set up and calibrated before the advance element reached their start point. The target appeared at 0847. She watched him through the scope with the same stillness she'd carried every day of her career. No elevated heart rate, no doubt, no noise in her head, just the scope, the target, the calculation she'd already completed, and the moment when everything aligned. One shot. At 0847, the operation was complete. The official report listed the engagement as a precision interdiction by a Naval Special Warfare Support Activity sniper operating under the direct authorization of the Firebase commander. No name. The classification level ensured the details would remain restricted. But inside Firebase Kestrel, in the Operations Center, someone had written a single line on the whiteboard where mission outcomes were tracked. It said, Petty Officer Okafor. 2 ops. 2 for 2. Graves saw it when he came in for the morning brief. He looked at it for a moment. He didn't erase it. She left Kestrel on a Thursday. Same way she arrived. Supply bird. Early morning. 1 rifle case, 1 duffel, 1 logbook. Graves walked her to the airfield. He didn't do that for most people. He did it for people who'd changed something. Not loudly. Not with fanfare. Just changed it the way a precisely placed support structure changes the integrity of a building. Invisibly from the outside, essentially from within. At the ramp, he stopped. She turned. There'll be another assignment, he said. Different unit, different sector. They're going to read the performance report and have questions. There's always questions. They'll want to know about the secondary element, the decision sequence. She adjusted the strap on the rifle case. Then they should read the logbook. He almost smiled. Almost. I put in a recommendation for your file. Full disclosure on qualifications. She looked at him. A beat of silence. I didn't ask for that. I know. He held her gaze. But the next unit you go to shouldn't waste 3 days figuring out who they're dealing with. She was quiet for a moment. The rotors on the supply bird were spinning up. The noise pushed in around them. They'll still doubt it, she said. Not bitterly. Just accurately. Probably, he said, but they'll doubt it with the record in front of them. That changes what they do with the doubt. She nodded once, turned toward the ramp, stopped. The thermal decay calculation, she said, without turning back. The one that identified the secondary element. Yes. I ran it 4 times to make sure. Not because I doubted the method. Because I knew someone would ask. Graves watched her walk up the ramp. The bird lifted off 90 seconds later. He stood on the airfield until it was out of sight, which was not something he did for most people. Inside the operations center, the whiteboard had been photographed and digitally archived before anyone could erase it. Rourke had done it, quietly, early in the morning before the day's brief. He didn't tell anyone. He just knew it should exist somewhere. Some people wait their whole careers to be believed. Petty Officer First Class Zura Okafor didn't wait to be believed. She waited for the moment when belief would be undeniable, and then she made that moment herself, at 840 meters, in a thermal crosswind, through a window the size of a dinner plate, twice, without missing once. She didn't raise her voice to be heard. She didn't demand recognition to prove her worth. She did the work in silence, and let the work speak at a volume nobody could argue with. The shot that stopped the room wasn't just a sniper's shot. It was the result of 3 days of data analysis, 14 years of training, a thermal decay calculation run 4 times before dawn, and a lifetime of patience refined into something sharp enough to change the outcome of a mission and the assumptions of an entire element. Master Chief Graves never forgot it. Rourke never forgot it. Torres talked about it for the rest of his deployment. And somewhere, in the mountains of a province that won't appear on maps, there's a logbook with calculations in handwriting that's tight and precise and deliberate. The kind of writing that belongs to someone who understood from the very beginning that every number mattered. Not because someone was watching, because the shot had to be right. If someone had been underestimating you your entire life, would you correct them with your words, or make it undeniable with what you can do? And do you think the most dangerous kind of preparation is the kind nobody sees coming? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. If this story reminded you that the most powerful people in any room are usually the ones who didn't need to announce themselves, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a story like this. Share this with someone who's ever been underestimated. Tell them, the shot doesn't lie. Your next video is already on screen. Watch it now. We'll see you tomorrow.